Hey guys, and welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today, Ash and myself are going to be discussing training for aesthetics. That means we're looking at how can we train to look good naked, how we can walk down the street feeling good about ourselves. So, Ash, some common misconceptions. I think we should just kind of identify some of these first, because especially within the CrossFit sphere, where you obviously got a lot of functional training and stuff, people have a slight misconception about maybe the end result by, say, doing purely CrossFit. So maybe let's touch on that.
For sure. I think the first thing to clarify is CrossFit is a GPP program, so general physical preparedness. It's focused primarily on performance and health, getting people to be able to do more things, to perform better at basic tasks and improve their health markers. I think some of the confusion comes from a lot of the top athletes having incredible bodies that look ridiculous. Some of them look like bodybuilders, and the thought process for the typical gym goer is that if I do CrossFit, I'll end up looking like that. What they don't appreciate is that a lot of them have bodybuilding backgrounds to start with, so they had to spend a lot of time focusing on aesthetics before they got into the sport. The other thing that probably goes unappreciated is that they're doing probably 4 or more times the training volume per week. So they're not doing just 1 hour a class 3 to 5 times a week. They are going well above and beyond. So their physiques are a byproduct of extreme performance training rather than just rocking up to a class. I think this is a nice point that touches on what we're talking about with the perfect athlete, where if you're an athlete training for performance, you have little to no consideration for your appearance and your aesthetics. It's all about how you perform and how you compete. So some great examples here are in UFC. You've got Daniel Cormier, who I don't know if he still is, but he was the heavyweight champion of the world. So literally the last person on the planet that you want to have a fight with. He had what most people would describe as a dad bod, not really that muscular. He's obviously strong and able to throw very heavy punches, but he doesn't look at all like a bodybuilder. No abs, hasn't got like big arms or anything, but he will beat almost anybody in the world up in a fight, in a fair situation. Another great example from the fighting world, Ruiz knocked out Joshua. Yeah. I think that's a great example in that Joshua looks like a bodybuilder. Loads of people would aspire to have a body like his visually, but Ruiz, most people would say, is overweight, carries quite a lot of excess body fat, but in the sport of boxing, he could get one over on Joshua, which shows that from a sporting performance point of view, aesthetics aren't as important as they might. Anyone looking at the two guys before they fought, even if they didn't know anything about boxing, they'd probably say Joshua's the athlete, he'll win. And I think my favourite one in UFC is BJ Penn, because he's even in a weight class. I can't remember exactly what his weight class is, what his weight is, but he beats a lot of guys who look, in most people's eyes, 10 times better. Yeah. Because he's just so good at fighting, and he was criticised for not having great conditioning, but he's obviously spent his training time honing his craft and becoming very good at the technical aspects of fighting, which has meant that even if he's less fit and definitely doesn't look as good, he's still able to outperform a lot of his competitors because he's spent his training time on the sport rather than looking good. And I think that opportunity cost is a really key part of the conversation for athletes and everyday individuals. Is if you're doing one thing, you're not doing the other. So if you're doing bodybuilding and you're not spending your time practicing Muay Thai or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that's an opportunity missed to get better at fighting. And you'll turn up in the ring looking better, but that's not your priority. No. And it's kind of a similar theme to a lot of our conversations, is setting your priorities and being clear on what you want, and then it's easy to go after it. So if you do CrossFit and you want to look better, how much of a trade-off are you willing to make of sacrificing CrossFit performance to grow muscles or lose fat? Yeah.
Because touching on that is, I think when you're talking about like the top of the game, especially like within the CrossFit sphere, where you look at like, say, Matt Fraser, good example, right? I remember watching one of his documentary things he did, or whatever it was, and he said how obviously, like, during his training season, he's, the way he's eating, everything is precise, making sure he can turn up to the gym pretty much as near enough exactly the same every single day so he can perform at the highest potential, right? Now, he says when he gets coming towards the games, it's when he starts to add a little bit more body fat on his body, make sure he's got a bit more cushioning, because he knows the stresses that are going to come from the week or the weekend, say, of fitness that they're going to be put through. He has to make sure his body can take that stress, because when you're too lean, obviously the body can't take as much stress because the joints are just not enough cushioning. So I remember when he was like, I ate a lot more like Ben and Jerry's stuff, like, just, to add a little bit of extra body fat and stuff. But it just shows that, there is no regard to body composition there. He just purely wants to be the fittest in the world at a sport. So he does what he does so he eats to make sure that he can perform to the highest potential, and the way he looks happens to be pretty good. So he has a great body. So that's it. He's not training there doing his curls. He's training there doing very specific things that are going to make him better. So when it comes to that misconception, because obviously when you've got people coming into the gym and say starting the class, I want to look like people in the fitness documentary, I want to look like a CrossFit athlete, and they're going to come in and they're, say, 6 months into their training, and they're doing their hour classes, they're doing them, say, 3 to 4, say 5 times a week, right? So they're getting a good bit of work in. Now, what would you say could be quite a common after 6 months? What do you think a result would be if someone come in that was a little bit overweight and they wanted to look like, say, one of their people that have seen in a documentary? What would they look like probably after 6 months of training?
Well, obviously, nutrition's a huge factor in what will happen to their body composition. Whether their calories are at maintenance, above or below, will dictate whether they add or lose weight, obviously. I think for the average person, if they're relatively untrained and start doing CrossFit for 6 months, they should be feeling better, feeling fitter, having more energy day in, day out, and hopefully progressing through the skills of CrossFit, moving better, performing well, feeling stronger as well, depending on their previous training history. In terms of body composition, for an absolute newbie, you might have the sort of, I guess, beginner's luck, where you do look a lot better in that you've probably added a bit of muscle and maybe lost a bit of fat. But that, again, completely depends on what your history was before CrossFit. Because if you were doing bodybuilding, for example, you might see the opposite, where you actually lose a bit of size and potentially put on a bit of fat, depending on how you're eating. It's all, very relative to the individual and how it's a change for them. I think. Go on.
Now, just on that, so I'm just thinking about like that beginner person. And it's like when you get your newbie gains, the ones that normally you come in, you're completely fresh into training. You're like, you can pretty much do anything, and you will say put on muscle, because it's such a stress on the body. It's like, fuck, I need to adapt. I need to repair. I need to be able to, if he's going to do it or she's going to do this to me again, I need to get better. I need to get stronger. So I think as a newbie, pretty much, and that's anywhere between like 0 and 1 year when we talk about newbies, really. You say 0 to 2, but 0 to 1 year, really. You come in, you can do pretty much anything, and you will just most likely look better. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much, so obviously better is individual. What you think is better is going to be different to someone else. But if you're going in with a goal to hopefully, say, lose a bit of body fat, maybe look a little bit more like in shape, then that will definitely be you will be in better shape. Mm. But then obviously I know where you're going to lead on to now. If someone was then a little bit more training history, coming, say, from the bodybuilding background, as you said, it's like where I've come from, a bit of a bodybuilding background and powerlifting, right? So then going into CrossFit, I definitely haven't put on size, I would say, especially in my upper body. My upper body's been my lower body, I'd say, even though I didn't need to really grow any more legs, I feel my legs have got a slight bit bigger, but they're also just a lot stronger, just because of the amount of squatting and stuff that's done in CrossFit. But because I stepped away from, I want to have a bigger upper body for a period of time, it didn't matter to me. So then obviously that my training could be a lot more, say, CrossFit-esque. So if you were someone that was with a bit of training history, what would happen?
I think you're a really good example, because the thing that predicts your result is what's the stimulus that your training is having on your body. So because you've already done a lot of bodybuilding and your upper body is used to a high volume of bodybuilding style training, the relative stimulus of CrossFit is less stimulation for growth in your upper body, but your lower body, you're probably doing a huge amount more volume to your legs, which is why they have continued to grow. So it completely depends on what your history is and where you're coming from, but the relative stimulus is the key differentiator. And it's we didn't plan this, but that's a perfect example in you and your upper body versus your lower body. Relatively speaking, the upper body has had less of a hypertrophic stimulus than the lower body, which is why it hasn't grown, but the legs have continued to grow. So that's a really good example.
And the thing is as well, it's because just thinking about that, it's like, because everything that you say doing CrossFit pretty much is to try and be efficient. So it's to try and have as little stress going through the upper body pretty much, because when most people say upper and lower body, their upper body is going to be the limiting factor, because it's like how much grip you have, how much shoulder endurance you have, those type of things. Now, with the lower body, you can say that's something like a wall ball, squats, and you're going to be able to do quite a lot of volume. So even if you say body weight, the amount of just constant squats, is I train legs a lot anyway, but going into CrossFit, you're either doing legs or shoulders. That's it. So, but when you are doing shoulders, say upper body, you're trying to say jerk. You're trying to get under the weight without using the shoulders. You're trying to snatch. You're trying to snap underneath and get it through your whole body. So it just shows that's and pull-ups. Another prime example. People bash on, say, the butterfly pull-up and stuff like that, but it's because you're trying to be efficient. You're trying to take as little stress through the body as possible and use the momentum to do as many as you can. Whereas obviously when in the strength club class when we was at WIT and stuff, I would make people do a bit more towards like the bodybuilding style. So there was time and attention. So obviously then we're going to touch on that at least a bit later, but a type of training stimulus that will give you a required outcome.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think once you're clear on your outcome, so let's imagine you are a CrossFitter, you've been doing it for a while and you're not getting as big or muscular as you had hoped, and you're now clear on that. We could probably do a whole podcast on why you've got an aesthetic goal in the first place. That's a very deep conversation if you get into it, but that's for another time. If you do want to get bigger and you're doing CrossFit, the first thing to say is hypertrophy is not a performance goal, and you're kidding yourself if you think that is the case. There's a phrase that goes around some strength and conditioning places where a bigger muscle has the potential to be a stronger muscle. While that may be true, the time you spent getting bigger is time you could have spent getting stronger. And that explains a lot of what we're saying about sportsmen and athletes not looking as good, but actually performing better because they haven't wasted time on bodybuilding. And there is a lot of overlap, but if you're going after hypertrophy, a perfect example is time under tension and tempo reps. You're literally training your body to move slowly, which is inefficient. If you're trying to do a workout, speed and power is almost always a better option, whether it's for wall balls or it's for snatch. So you doing those tempo reps, you are reduced, or it's a very unrelated skill to the skill of like 1 rep maxing. However, it will cause your muscles to grow, and that is because it's inefficient. It's a bad way of doing it, so it's more stress to the body, so it's a signal for the muscle to grow. So once you've accepted that you do want to be bigger and go more indirectly after your strength gains, you will still get stronger by doing hypertrophy work. Like bodybuilders are still very strong, but they're not as strong as powerlifters because powerlifters are going directly after strength. So if that is the case, we know we want to get bigger. How can we tweak our training to factor that in and optimize a little bit more for size versus performance? When we're looking at muscle gain or hypertrophy, there are 4 key stimuli or things you should be considering when designing a program or doing your training. Time under tension is 1. So how long is the muscle working during a set? Someone can do a set of 10 squats, lightning fast, 20 to 25 seconds, or they can do it super slow, 3 seconds up, 3 seconds down, then it's a minute. It's a completely different stimulus, and the amount of weight you'll be able to lift is completely different. Like I just said, we actually want to reduce the efficiency. So you'll be able to lift less, but the stress and the time under tension will be greater from one set of squats. What we're looking at here as well is with tempo, you can focus on the eccentric or lowering portion of the lift, which is more a greater cause of the micro tears or trauma in the muscle. So essentially, when we do training, there are little rips in the muscle, and then when the body repairs, it overcompensates and grows the muscle a little bit bigger, so it's more resistant to that damage next time round. And an interesting fact on that eccentric damage, if you do one of those staircase marathons, so you go up a skyscraper, going up, you won't get very sore at all. But if you go down the stairs, which people think of as easier because gravity's helping you, you'll be sore for days. Like one of the sorest I've ever been was going down Table Mountain. We only had time to go up or down. So we got the cable car up and walked down. I had no idea why we thought that was a good idea at the time. And I had probably nearly the sorest quads I've ever had in my life for like 4 or 5 days, just because you're constantly, the muscle is lengthening under load.
Putting the brakes on.
Exactly. And that's what really rips you up, but is a great stimulus for hypertrophy.
So just on time under tension, so just to make it really clear then to the listeners, is like if you are a CrossFitter, this is now obviously making sure that you are, as you've said, looking to add some size, be inefficient, and just to build your muscles. Now, obviously, that is going to take away from CrossFit performance, right? Initially, especially because it's, as I said, we're now going from moving really fast and efficiently and getting something done, say, for time, or as many reps and rounds as we can. So now it's right, let's actually do as little weight or as much weight as possible, but then for the longest amount of time as possible. So as you said, like it's going to now, you're going to say you do a 100 kilo back squat for a minute, rather than doing a 200 kilo 1 RM. Yeah. It's like the actual, so yes, you've moved more weight with that 1 RM, but you've now essentially put a lot more trauma through your muscles. So, it's making sure that you, as Ash has said, like making sure you have the understanding of your goals and your direction you need your training to go in. So
perfect. Yeah. Another great example of that, I think, is butterfly pull-ups. You could probably knock out 10 butterfly pull-ups in 10 to 12 seconds. But if you did 10 tempo pull-ups and a minute of work, it's so much harder. You'll be wrecked after a minute. Like a lot of people couldn't even do that slowly. But a lot of people would come up, the same one person doing 10 butterfly or 10 3 up, 3 down. They'd come off 10 butterfly, probably ready to go again in a few seconds, but they'd need a good amount of rest and be a lot sorer from doing the strict tempo ones. Great. The next stimulus, so number 2 for hypertrophy, is mechanical tension. So this is where strength and weight is a bigger factor, where the literal tension going through the muscle tells the body that it needs to lay down more muscle fibers to be able to handle the same stress in future. So if we get a little bit sciencey, looking at the muscle fibers, you've got actin and myosin, and there's a distinction between 2 types of hypertrophy. You've got myofibrillar and sarcoplasmic. Myofibrillar is growing more muscle fibers so that you are stronger next time round, versus sarcoplasmic, which is the sarcoplasmic fluid in a muscle cell. It's basically the water. Exactly. So both of them are valid for getting bigger. Only myofibrillar will really make you stronger. Yep. And this explains the difference in, like, people talk about muscle density and the quality of a muscle. So if you look at people like Ronnie Coleman, he's really dense because he was really strong and he lifted really heavy ass weights with a really nose. Whereas like the classic puffy bodybuilder spends a lot of time on the pump and literally just swelling the fluid in the cells, and the strength carryover is much less.
In a way, that just kind of reminds me of, say, I know Phil Heath was strong, but as in, like, you compare, say, Phil Heath and Ronnie Coleman. Phil Heath was a lot more, I say, like, puffy. So for people that don't know, Phil Heath would say that he won Miss Olympia, I think, was it 5 times, and then he got knocked off. So it's like, so nearly like become one of the most up there. But so really smooth, but really defined. Like he had all the right cuts and everything to be Mr. Olympia, so the best in the world. But Ronnie Coleman at the time, he was a different monster. You know, the guy was, I say, he was dense, he was tall, he was massively muscular. So he was so different. He was like close to like the Dorian Yates as well, because obviously Dorian Yates was another strong British bodybuilder who then obviously became best in the world as well. And because he, again, was strong, I said that density of a muscle. So
yeah, and it's also, I think, what explains calisthenics physiques. Like they're not massive, but they're very muscular and very dense.
Very dense.
And they have a sort of a grainier, more striated quality to their muscles, which bodybuilders don't often have. And it is because there is a huge amount of tension going through their muscles, even though they're just using body weight most of the time, because of the lever lengths and the actual amount of force that they need to generate to move their bodies around a bar or rings. And gymnasts as well, like Olympic gymnasts, you look at their shoulders, they're so grainy because they are dealing with huge amounts of like even the small stabilizer muscles are dealing with huge amounts of tension when they're doing all their crazy stuff. So in terms of incorporating mechanical tension into your training, lifting heavier is good. The considerations you should have there is obviously lifting heavier and close to failure, which we'll get to later, carries a greater amount of risk. So there's a trade-off to be made there. How much do you want the grainier, denser look and to be strong versus pure size? If you want pure size and you don't mind the less grainy, more bodybuildery look, then mechanical tension is probably less of a consideration.
Yeah. And I guess exercise selection comes in massive. So you can obviously, like for instance, you trying to stimulate your legs and you're going to go for that strength sizing, back squat, cool, front squat, whatever, sweet. But you really want to smash your legs in. You're going to do something like a leg press where you can really isolate to a degree, say isolate your legs as much weight as you can. And that's why bodybuilders do leg press. And it's like, no, they don't use necessarily, they squat, but their squat isn't their prime leg builder. It will be the leg press, the leg extension, the leg curl, all these isolation machines that give them that pump, that give them that damage that they're after with relatively safety.
Exactly. They can put the mechanical tension exactly where they want on a certain muscle to grow it. Really good point. Number 3 is metabolic stress. So the burn, the pump, that's why bodybuilders always talk about it. Literally that fatigue that's building in a muscle is the chemical signal for that muscle to grow and become greater. And that's why training to failure, doing drop sets, same muscle supersets, they're all just devices to try and increase that biochemical sensation. And something that I think illustrates this really well is occlusion training. So if you haven't heard of occlusion training, it is basically where you put a tourniquet or a strap at the top of your limb, so maybe around the upper arm, which prevents blood flow out of that limb. So if I put it around the top of my left arm, blood is now going to get stuck in my left arm and struggle to get back. So all of those metabolic byproducts are building up to a greater concentration than they would do without the tourniquet. That means I'm going to burn and get a massive pump much quicker than without the tourniquet. And benefits to occlusion training for bodybuilders are you can use a lot lower weight, so bringing down that risk factor as well, and you can get quite quick results. They also use it in injury scenarios where, again, you don't want to put much weight through the limb, so you can get a hypertrophic stimulus without much load just through the pure chemical byproducts. And there's a really interesting case study of one of the US weightlifters, I can't remember which one it was, but he tore his ACL and he basically did occlusion training on the injured leg and normal training on the uninjured leg. And after his rehab period, his injured leg was bigger than his uninjured leg because the occlusion training had that much of an impact for muscle growth.
Yeah, with like BFR, so blood flow restriction training, I think it's such a fun way of like spicing up your training in a way. especially if you want to just get a massive pump and something that lasts a while. And, I really do recommend giving it a go. But the thing is, it's what people then kind of sometimes use it. They start relying upon it in a way. And something like blood flow restriction training, I think that should be like a tool in your toolbox that a different sim. It's like training to failure, like all these other isometrics, all these other things that you can do to challenge your body. It's a completely different way. So for someone that hasn't done blood flow restriction before, definitely give it a go. Obviously, make sure you're safe to do it. I don't want to recommend it because look into it first. Please read into I'm not liable here at all. I'm saying look into this. But for those that are a little just unaware, just give you a rough idea. You do roughly 30 reps with a weight that by say around 22, you start to really struggle. You're then going to have a period of rest, which is normally around 30 seconds. And then you do another 3 more sets of 15 reps with 30-second rest in between each one. So basically all that time, you're essentially like a balloon. You're pumping up that balloon, and then you're giving it a little bit of time to essentially adjust to the new size. You're then going to pump it up even more, adjust to the new size, and you're going to do that 4 total times. So imagine the size of this balloon. It wants to burst, right?
Yeah.
And then a little bonus that I like to do with myself and my clients is once you've done those last sets, squeeze your safety. You're doing biceps, do a massive bicep, squeeze your bicep as hard as you possibly can before you take off the tourniquet. When you then take off the tourniquet, you feel the rush of blood just all going. It's a very good feeling. Definitely recommend it for those that haven't tried it. Yeah,
it's very intense, and I think when we go back to that.
Sorry, have you done it before, Ash?
I have, yeah.
Have you done it on like your quads or your calves?
I haven't done legs, just done arms.
So I'll tell you. So I've done it on my quads, and so we had to use, like knee wraps, like the strap ones. So I put that around the top of the quad, doing leg extensions. Because back in like I think it was like 2012, 2013, we was doing it, and I've got some videos, and it's just like you're using such light weight, and you physically can barely move your legs, but the pump is just insane. So.
It is, yeah. I think that's what I remember from when I did it. I only did it a couple of times a few years ago, but I was curling like 5 kilos and got to literally the point of failure at an embarrassingly low number of reps, where literally everything I could to just try and contract it, and just that. Well, that's one of the things that causes failure is the chemical imbalance. Literally, the neurotransmitters are so out of balance that you can't tell your muscles to contract, and it just happens so much sooner because they can't get cleared out.
It's definitely where like using machines and stuff like that are really beneficial for, say, you can obviously do blood flow restriction with like body weight movements, you do it with dumbbells, you can do it, but using machines, especially like cables, because that constant tension, it's intense. So you can tell I kind of like blood flow restriction.
Yeah, I didn't realise, mate. I didn't know you're into that stuff.
Yeah, man.
Big health disclaimer there, just to be very clear.
Yeah.
Sure, you do your research into it, because you don't want to have a tourniquet on too tight or for too long, because that can be.
That's a real misconception. People tighten up so much, and you're looking for about 6, 7 out of 10. So because the pump is what makes it tight, not the tightness of the tourniquet. Yeah,
very important point. Great. And number 4 on the hypertrophy hit list is volume. More is more. So something we always say at Red Pill, more is more. You can't substitute doing more work for doing less work. It's always more. So it kind of overlaps with the other 3 factors, but time under tension, more is more. Mechanical tension, more is more. And metabolic stress, more is more. So just doing more of the same, you'll get you'll get greater results. Obviously, there is a inflection point where doing too much, you can't handle doing too much, but the principle of progressive overload, you need to constantly be creeping up, as a rough rule of thumb, about 10% per week of improvement. But this explains why systems like German volume training get people good results, because if you're doing 10 sets of 10, even if you're doing them quickly, the total time under tension is going to be very high. The total mechanical tension is going to be reasonably high, even if you're not lifting that heavy, and the metabolic stress is going to be very high. Like if you've never done it, the first time you do, you're getting into set 6. You've probably never done 6 sets of anything before. I've got 4 more, which is a whole. Like, to a lot of people, 4 sets of 10 is a whole session. So it is just relentless, and it just gives you more of all those different stimuli, and at the end of the day, the stimulus is what creates the result.
Yeah. And I think especially like with volume, as just to really reiterate this point, is in you need to load a muscle and you need it to be stressed, right? So when we talk about volume, you can say 3 sets of 10, or you can do say 10 sets of 3, right? Now, what you can do, so this is an example. So I've been doing this in my training recently, is once I've built up to my heavy bench, I've been dropping it to body weight, which is say 100 kilos for me, and doing 50 reps, right? Now, if I did that in 10 sets of 5, or if I did that in 5 sets of 10, or if I did that in say sets of 3 and sets of 5, at the end of the day, I've done 50 reps at the end with 100 kilos. So then that does then mean in total I've had 50,000 kilos through my chest. So yeah,
5,000.
5,000. Yeah, I was gonna say, hang on a minute. I was like, way too
That's
much.
a big day, mate. That's a big day.
5,000. So I've had 5,000 kilos of weight going through my chest. Now, this is then where people get too hung up on like the exact sets and reps for growth, when they forget about really cool, how much total work have you put in? And if you do one chest exercise and you do say 50 reps, fine. And if that's all you're doing for the week, that's going to be nowhere near enough if you want to start adding some serious size to say your chest is an example. Another thing I've been doing recently is training to music and songs. So like playing a song and say that lasts say three and a half minutes, and just doing this one exercise for 3.5 minutes, getting as much work in as I can, whether that's through isometric holds, whether it's through negatives, whether it's through just moving the weight. So that, and obviously if I've got one song to do maximum work, if I rest, I'm wasting potential work time. So that's not necessarily saying that this is like the way to train, but this is another fun way of doing volume, because volume can be boring.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So that's very honest. Like 10 sets of 10 is boring as fuck. Like it's just such a long time doing the same thing, and it adds a different element. So doing 10 sets of 10 is, I think, a great way to challenge yourself, not only just physically, but also mentally, and actually commit to doing 10 sets of 10 of quality work. That's a goal in itself. So
exactly. Yeah.
I think just on that is, I think with the 10 sets of 10 side, that just made me think is, because we're a generation of instant gratification, we want the work done so quickly, so we don't want to have to wait. So we're doing 10 sets of 10, you having to wait to the end, you're like, oh my God, this is such a long time. It's be different and do those 10 sets of 10.
Give it a go, definitely. I think everyone needs to go through it at some point in their life. And I think, I was going to move on to how we'd incorporate those principles into your training, and your song is a really nice starting point for tempo work, and that's a great way of just adding time under tension. So clearly everything should be tracked, so you know that you can be improving week on week. So if you're doing a song at a given weight, the time is fixed, and you know that adding a tiny bit more weight every week means that you've got fixed time under tension with a little bit more weight. You are progressively overloading that stimulus. Volume, straightforward, like as you said, like total volume is a great way to track it. So 5,000 kilos for that chest finisher, that's the volume this week. So can we go to 5,500 next week by any stretch? That volume all counts, however it's broken up. The next one is not contradictory, but a consideration against that is working to failure. So when we're thinking about metabolic stress, doing 50 sets of 1 or doing 5 sets of 10 has a different amount of metabolic stress, because if you're doing singles, you're probably never building up enough of those byproducts of respiration in the cell. So there's not the acidity, there's not the burn, there's not the pump. So doing higher volume sets will have more of a trigger for that metabolic stress component. And that's why like classic bodybuilding rep ranges are 8 to 12 versus lower rep, because it just takes a certain amount of time under tension to get to that burn stage. And neither is wrong. They're just, like you said, different tools in the toolbox. And if you can't get 5,000 kilos of volume in doing sets of 10, getting 5,000 kilos of volume in in 50 singles is a valid way of just pulling the volume arm rather than the metabolic stress arm.
I think on that is what you can do though, which is kind of what is I try and treat it a bit like a performance goal as well. So what I mean by that is like, so 50 sets of 1 or 5 sets of 10, completely, I'd say they get you to the 5,000 kilos. Now, what I do, so rather than doing, say, 50 sets of 1, I kind of go to near failure. So for instance, this is, say, my reps I did the other day. So my first set after my max set was, I think it was 8 or 10 reps from my first set. Then the next set after that was 8. Then it went 6. Then it went 4. Then I was on 3. Then I stayed on 3 because I worked it out and I had like 21 left. So I just stayed on 3. So I knew it was 7 sets of 3. So what I then did to keep that stress, we said like doing 1 rep. What I did, I then reduced rest. So I had to get back. So then basically, basically like what we call rest pause. So you basically do your rep, you sit up, you shake it out and go again as soon as you can. But my goal, I'd only go again once I could do 3 reps because I didn't want to drop below 3 reps. Now, next week, when if I do the 50 reps again, I now might try to do, say, 10 sets of 5 rather than doing the big set thing with short rest. So then it's performance. I'm then getting better at endurance on my chest for 5 reps and I can increase. So again, you can, even though you might have, say, the volume goal of 5,000 kilos, you can then still also add a different variation within that 5,000 kilos.
Definitely. Just reminded me, actually, classic Arnie bodybuilding program. He used to just have like a 50 pull-up buyout. And I've given that to a couple of clients before where it's just a great metric for checking in where you are. How long does it take you? What's the breakup of your sets? And as long as you get 50 pull-ups in, if it's 50 by 1 or it's 10 by 5, just get 50 pull-ups done. I think that's a really nice marker.
Pull-ups are one of those ones where I think, especially if you can do pull-ups, I've always struggled with pull-ups being a bigger person. And it's like, I always use this excuse. I'm a bigger man, so, I've got more weight to move. Then people say, well, you should be at a better power to weight ratio. Now, I know when I'm lighter, I can do pull-ups a bit easier. So, but pull-ups are a massive gauge for me, as in to say for performance, to say, cool, am I too heavy for my current frame? Am I these? Because they're the real key indicators that you're just too heavy to perform this task.
Yeah,
so
there's nowhere to hide, eh?
No.
Good. Let's just rattle through these other ways to implement it in. Working to failure, as we just talked about, getting more micro tears, trauma, and getting that pump and sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. The same goes for drop set supersets we talked about earlier. Basically anything that makes it hurt, and essentially when it boils down to it, the body doesn't know how many sets, reps, volume, anything like that. All it feels is the signals that you're sending it. And the key signal is struggle. Your body needs to feel like it's struggling to grow muscle, because you need to create a biochemical business case to say you need to be bigger next time we do this, because at the moment you're not quite capable of performing what I need you to perform. And that only comes through by essentially making your body feel inadequate. So I can't lift this weight, or I can't do as much work as I'm asking you to do. So it has to be hard. Doing easy junk volume doesn't create the stimulus. And that's the classic mistake of your very average, mediocre gym goer. He'll turn up, go through the motions. He's like, I'm going to do 3 by 10 on this machine, that machine. And they've never hit the point where it flicks that muscle growth signal, because you haven't told the body that it needs to adapt to be able to do what you want it to do. And if you take nothing else away from this podcast, that is how you grow muscle, is working your body to the point where it feels inadequate and then needs to come back bigger and stronger. And then obviously eating shitloads is the other side of this coin, which is another podcast on its own.
Basically doing stuff you don't want to do, because your body will have to adapt, essentially, because you have to put it to a state of stress. And without putting it to the state of stress, it can't change. Same as in anything in life. You put yourself in the whole COVID situation. You're in a stressful situation. Most people then say, come out of this with a different mindset. So when that, a lot of the time, as what I've heard from a lot of people, has been a growth mindset. A lot of people come out of this with, actually, this is now the thing, which is a state of stress going into a state of direction and state of clarity. And that's exactly what the body has to do. You put it under the stress. It says, shit, I need to change so I can keep adapting to this. And then the thing is with training, why it's so fun is because week on week, you keep putting that stress on it. So it's like, fuck's sake, I want to grow. I just want to chill out.
That's it. But, no rest days.
So I think we've really touched, hit the nail on the head there with how a CrossFitter can train for aesthetics. And, at the end of the day, we touched on this at the start of the podcast between ourselves, and it's like, it's finding the right blend for you. But just remember, if you're going into something very 50-50, like half in, half out, you're going to get very mediocre results. Just like, say, with CrossFit as a methodology, you want to be bringing everything up and understanding that it's going to take a long time to build everything up. So if you have an aesthetic goal, you're going to need to be a lot more towards one side than the other. So I like to use the Pareto rule, which is 80-20. So like if you want, say, to still be decent at CrossFit-ish, you're going to say 20% CrossFit and then 80% just absolutely hammer your aesthetics goals. But if you're only a little bit aesthetics and you want to just like a pump, then do that to 20% and your 80% is going to be your CrossFit stuff. So just make sure you've taken a proper look inside of your goals. We've touched on previous podcasts as well, and just understand your why and then really define it so that you can work towards it.
Spot on. I think that's it. Should we leave that one there? There's still a lot more on aesthetics to come, I think. But I think
that's going to be on part 2.
Yeah, enough muscle gain for one day.
Yeah. So, guys, thanks a lot for listening. We really appreciate your time that you're giving to us to listen to our podcast and listen to us ramble. We hope you get stuff out of this. If you do, please leave a review on iTunes or share this with someone that you think will really benefit. As always, you can find us on all the platforms, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. So until next time.
Thanks, guys.